I don't know about you. If you grew up in the 60s, late 60s, throughout the 70s, or made your way into the 80s, the scholastic book lists were everything. You'd be at school and you'd get these lists of scholastic books you could possibly buy. I always gravitated towards either, those history stories that they would write, like Sam the Minuteman was the first scholastic book I ever got. But I always found myself gravitationally pulled towards the creepy, the spooky, the mysterious. I was a big fan of Alfred Hitchcock's stories to tell with the lights out. A big fan of, like, any sort of, record version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and all that kind of stuff. There's a book by Donald Sobel, who you actually may know as the author and the creator of Encyclopedia Brown. I don't know if you remember those books, but he was a boy detective, and he'd give you all the clues you needed. And at the end of the book, it would say, turn to page 88 to find out about the case of the missing. It's actually an exploding toilet in one of them, as a matter of fact. Encyclopedia Brown shows the way. Encyclopedia Brown solves them all. Encyclopedia saves the day. Those are all actual titles of it. But I remember that the book that left me with the biggest impression was a book that Sobel wrote, Donald J. Sobel, called Strange But True, 22 Amazing Stories. And in that collection of books, there were a number of stories, and some of them they're all factual, or supposedly factual, about Grigory Potemkin's villages, where we get the expression the Potemkin village from, the uncanny coincidences between Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln, and Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy. It goes on like that. There was one story that really just kind of stuck with me, and that's why tonight's topic is my jam. I like spooky stories. I like scary stories. I like telling them, and I enjoy them being told well. Very few of them scare me, leave me unsettled, uneasy. I'll have a jump in the movie theater or a jump reading the book, but once it's done, I'll go to bed with a good night's sleep. Didn't bother me at all. Oh, well done. I got a little bit spooked. The ones that stick with me, though, are like one of the ones that Sobel tells in that book, Strange But True. It is about the dirigible L-8, a hot air balloon, a military hot air balloon at the end of World War II. Cody and Adams are the name of the two pilots on board. I think it's a commander and a lieutenant, something like that. It's Lieutenant, it's Lieutenant Cody, and then there's a guy under him named Adams. And the last thing they say before they're never heard from again is, there is a suspicious oil slick in the water. Let's head over. They never get heard from again. The L-8 does, though. The L-8 lands softly on a beach where it is discovered that everything is just as they left it. There's no sign of violence. There's no sign of action. All there is, I think the coffee is still there. Everything as it was laid out is still there. And they go through all the permutations of what might have happened, and nobody can really figure it. They simply vanished. That last broadcast, that crackling sense of there's something suspicious down there. I'm going to go check it out. Just an average day, end of the war. War is wrapping up. Maybe it was a Japanese submarine. Maybe they both fell out accidentally. How did they both fall out accidentally? All these unanswered questions just simply vanished. And that creepy, empty L-8 landing on a beach. True story. Those are the stories that when I go to bed at night would always give me a little creepiness. This is one, in about today's topic, its theme, its urban legend, that begins at around 1880. There's a story about it in 1882 in the Cincinnati Enquirer, reports on this. That a man named David Lang, a farmer over in Gallatin, Tennessee, actually right outside of Gallatin, Tennessee, right in Sumner County, is just got finished meeting with his attorneys. They are leaving in a buggy. They see him walking across the field. His happy wife and his two children are on the porch. They're watching David make his way across the field. And in the midst of all of that, he simply vanishes. I don't mean that he falls or stumbles or that there's a moment of unease or that something seems to be going wrong. He literally, in front of those five people, as according to the Cincinnati Enquirer of 1882 in September, gone. He's just gone. And it gets picked up as a story, and David Lang's story begins to make the circulation. As a matter of fact, there's a really good case that it probably inspired Ambrose Bierce to write one of his creepiest unexplained vanishing stories, The Difficulty in Crossing a Field. Ironic, of course, because Ambrose Bierce walked across the border into Mexico at the turn of the 20th century, and he vanished. Don't forget, Bierce is the same guy that gave us Carcosa, the creepy words that haunt everybody in the HBO first season of True Detective. Places that you go to from which you never return. So vanishings are kind of one of the things for me, and I love them, because they really do produce a sense of creepiness. Because if you notice everything I just told about that story, it's a nice day. Lang is happy. His wife is happy. His children are happy. Obviously, things have gone well with his attorneys. They're riding off. They're giving him a big wave. There is nothing about what is happening that suggests that anything is wrong until it is. It is one of the things that drives Americans crazy. We like answers. It's okay if there's a killer, provided that we eventually unmask him. It's okay if there's a monster, provided we eventually catch him. Americans don't like the unexplained. Americans don't like the loose end remaining loose. And when things just simply disappear in the blink of an eye, well, that's when it gets a little bit more difficult to sleep at night. Two weeks ago, we talked about how Resurrection Mary's geography, that drive from Chicago into the burbs, past the old Willowbrook, dance hall, past the ex-burbs, past the lower middle class housing, past Resurrection Cemetery into Lincoln, in many ways was perfect. A perfect place for Mary to exist. A liminal space, a genuinely liminal space as people go from being city dwellers into becoming suburban dwellers. A place where something like Mary would have in fact happened. The geography of vanishings, and in particular the David Lang vanishing, reported by the Cincinnati Enquirer in 1882, is a particularly troublesome one, because one of the reasons why a vanishing story works so well when you tell it is that it's the exact opposite of most stories when they get told. Most stories have a lot of moving pieces. You kind of have to set the mood and to kind of slowly but surely build a sense of isolation and dread around the story itself. This is the exact opposite. Did you know that Tennessee has more state parks than any other state in the country? More than Alaska, more than Hawaii, more than the great western states, more than California. Tennessee has more state parks. And that is due to the federal government in the 30s creating the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. It created a lot of wonderful lake areas, a lot of brooks, a lot of wooded areas with ample supplies of water. It's beautiful. And the reason why Gallatin, Tennessee, Sumner County in particular, is such a great place for the David Lang story is there's nothing wrong with it. It's a small town. It's about 30 minutes away from Nashville. You take the I-65 and then you get on, I think it's Tennessee 386. I think you get on that. And you make your way into Gallatin, and it's got a beautiful historic center of town. It's got Bledsoe Creek State Park, which is gorgeous. It's actually perched right on a lake. It is a great spot to kind of get away from the growing metropolis that is Nashville. Now, granted, by the time I'm talking to you, it may be that it's only 25 minutes away, given how much Nashville is growing. It's lovely. The only problem they have is a little bit of growing traffic on the state road because more and more people are fleeing there to kind of get back to nature a little bit. Nothing sinister about the place. There aren't a lot of legends of hauntings or evil doings down there. It's a lovely place, which is what makes the power of David Lang's vanishing that much more pronounced. Like I told you before, his wife's on the porch, she's happy, no trouble with the kids. Lawyers think that all the books are squared and all the legal deals on the land are all good. David's just walking across that earth, and the only thing that remains of him once he goes away is a circular, brown circle of dead leaves. Something happens, is the way the story goes. And I think in many ways the reason why this geography is different from almost every other place that we will talk about where there are mysterious things and curses and hauntings and dreadful things is if somebody disappears in a place like that, that makes perfect sense. If, for instance, all the stories from the 80s about the women who disappeared on the Appalachian Trail and in the Great Smoky Mountains, if in fact, it involves circuitous routes and deep ravines and all kinds of dangerous sort of ways, we go, that's terrible and we can't find them, but something happened. But what happens when somebody is literally waving at you on a sunny day on a nature trail in a very, very populated area? You watch them wave, you watch them drop their cigarette, they put it out, they turn the corner, and when you go, they are gone. What happens when an old man gets on a bus to go from one town to another? The bus driver pulls over to go to the bathroom, let the passengers go to the bathroom, watches everybody get off, doesn't watch the old man get off, watches everybody get back on, and then drives on, only to reach his destination, and the old man is simply gone. What happens when somebody sees their mother just up the route, lose her footing for one moment, fall to the side of the road, and when they get there, the roadside, which, by the way, is only a few feet away, and there's nobody there, and they never see them again. All in sunlight, all on nice days, all in nice places. Something happened. It happened in the split second of time, and the person is just gone, making the sunshine and the nice day even that much more creepy. I love this stuff. We've got a whole bunch of great folks joining us tonight. Can't wait for you to meet them. Can't wait to talk to them again. Hey guys, it's Gage Illuminations. Come on back. Tonight's episode of Gage Illuminations is brought to you by NeuroPep. Long day, long haul, long line at the receiver? Grab a NeuroPep. Enough caffeine to wake up your body and enough proprietary ingredients to wake up, well, let's just say you'll notice things. NeuroPep. Because sleepy drivers miss opportunities. Do not consume NeuroPep with other Red Hook Lab products unless instructed by an authorized representative or a recurring dream. Jesus Christ. For the longest time on Sirius XM, and afterwards in briefly lived incarnations, author Megan Kate Nelson, who writes about the West, and we'll talk about her new book a little bit later on, writes about the West, came on one of my shows to talk about her book, Saving Yellowstone. I fell in love with that book. I kind of sort of fell in love with her and decided that it would be great if she would come on once a month and join Lindsay Lawler and I to talk about her favorite Westerns or Westerns that I hadn't seen in a while, or she hadn't seen, or I promised myself I'd eventually get to, and she co-hosted with me Western of the Month. She joins us on Gage Illuminations, our third episode, where we are talking about The Vanishing. In case you guys don't know, Saving Yellowstone and The Three-Cornered War are extraordinary books. She's got a new book out. I'll hold off on that for a second, but I just want to say good evening, good to see you. Megan, how have you been?
So great to see you. I'm so happy to be back with you. I've been good. I've been mostly promoting the book since March, since it was published, The Westerners. I had a little hiatus here at home from late June until now. And then in a week, I am going to Colorado for 3 weeks for a series of book events because, Jimmy, I'm not sure if you know this, obviously we had a whole brouhaha, especially here in Boston, about America 250 this summer, but it is also Colorado 150. Colorado is the centennial state and was brought into the Union officially on August 1st, 1876.
I did not know that, and it's funny because I have a dear friend who's going to be joining me in Providence very soon who actually lives in Denver right now, and I had no idea that was going. It's just weird because America 250 is possibly the strangest, maybe the most American of all ways to celebrate a birthday. It has been a wild and woolly year. We have
Yeah.
Peter on the show today, and of course, he's got a book tour. You've got a book tour. Before we get to Vanishing in the Wilderness, I do want to talk about your book tour and the book, The Westerners, because I feel like in many ways it's taken a lot of all the different stuff that you've been working on and brought it all together under one giant umbrella. It's not only an accomplishment, it's kind of a summation of a lot of the work that you've been doing. Is that fair?
It is fair. It's a much bigger book than my previous books. The
Yep.
other ones have had a kind of anywhere from a year and a half to 4 to 8 year range, except for my very first book, which had a 200-year range. But on the Okefenokee Swamp in southern Georgia, in northern Florida. But this book, The Westerners, covers pretty much the entire 19th century. So it's very kind of broad in scope chronologically, but also geographically, because it takes on the entire West, which has many different subregions. As you know, Jimmy, in California is its own special thing there on the Pacific coast. But yeah, I mean, I was just really interested. I've always been interested since I was a kid in what it means to be a Westerner, what it means to have regional identity. And especially recently and through the kind of era when we all shifted to the internet, I was also wondering if these regional identities existed anymore, right? Or do we all disappear into the World Wide Web, right? Does region even matter? Do we care? Is it part of an identity? And that was the kind of starting question. But then it kind of morphed into a book about who Westerners are and how the frontier myth that we're all so familiar with and that we saw so many times, Jimmy, in all the Westerns that we were watching together previously, how the frontier myth actually erased a lot of these Westerners from the conception of who built that region and why they were important.
It's interesting, too, because we are talking about vanishings and disappearances here today. And in many ways, you could actually argue that sometimes the creation of narrative in and of itself, that when we craft a narrative, we are deliberately writing over what actually is. You know, the idea that an urban legend, when you tell it, you actually are moving away from the truth of what it is that happened. Lindsay, our mutual friend, loves to say, never let the facts get in the way of a good story. The problem with that is that often the story is pretty damn great itself, and when you overwrite it with kind of a broad, encompassing myth, a lot of things disappear, and that we could make an argument that certain kinds of writing, certain kinds of storytelling, in and of themselves are an act of violence that kind of writes over those who were. Is that fair?
It is fair. And I think, you know, even while I was writing The Westerners, I mean, it's a big book, but it's in the end 350 pages. And I couldn't talk about everyone, right? I had to kind of get rid of some people and add some people. But one of the main themes of the book, too, is how, you know, people existed, they lived their lives, they were very present in their own time, and people knew them and they lived. And then after they died, and sometimes even in the course of their own life, people began to rewrite their history. And so the essence of who they were disappeared into the story that people told about them. And so, I mean, that's super meta, right?
Because it's not. But no, because I talk about the idea of, you know, using words to kind of, you know, colonize. But this is the flip side of it too, because part of the great story of America, though, is the rewriting of your story, is to use the giant canvas of the West to kind of help who you were disappear and become who you want to be. Is that the great allure of the West?
I mean, that's, for some people it is. I mean, certainly for someone like Jim Beckworth, who is a major figure in the book and crosses paths with a lot of the other protagonists in the book. He was born into slavery, and his father, who was his enslaver, freed him ultimately. And he went off with fur traders starting in the 1820s and proceeded really to kind of reinvent himself. He gained new skills. He went to new places. He was very peripatetic. He was constantly on the move. He was always Jim Beckworth, though. And he gained a lot of fame and a lot of notoriety on the frontier because he was this kind of outsized figure. And he seemed to be in so many different places, so many important places in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s, you know, the gold rush in California, the gold rush in Colorado, like he took part in all of these things. But, you know, he was phenotypically Black, which means, you know, he was biracial, but he was coded as Black to anyone who would have met him due to his skin color. And so he was constantly kind of one step ahead of organized government in a lot of the places in the West, because he knew that once territories were organized, once states were organized, then he would lose whatever rights he had. So these places in the West kind of pre-territorial status were very fluid, and they offered a lot of people a way to kind of disappear or to reinvent or to kind of make themselves anew again and again and again.
Well, it's funny because, and let's get really meta. You're talking about vanishing the vanishing. That basically what he's doing is he's staying, my favorite expression is one step ahead of the sheriff. Not that he's trying to outrun the law because there's a warrant on him, trying to outrun the law because the law means the loss of his rights. But what's interesting to me is the fact that you've got a space of erasure, and what so much of the occupation and the settlement of the West really is an attempt to erase the erasure. The idea that it's like we're going to bring the stuff that was here out to here. I'm going to go really far afield here, Megan, but there is, I don't know if you've read Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles. There is a beautiful passage in it in the middle of the book where he talks about the explorers and the adventurers, many of whom lost their lives, then the hard-nosed scrambling settlers, many of whom lost their lives, then the businessmen who started to kind of make things work and get the commerce going, and then finally the people show up on Mars who make the rules. And he said they began to push people around with a rule for this and a rule for that and a rule for this. And then the little brief chapter ends with the sentence, "It was almost inevitable, but those original arrivals began to push back," ellipses. And then the second half of the book takes off. And the thing is, when you create a space like you've created here, and we'll get to vanishings in a second, when you create a space like you've created here, do you become aware, does a sadness begin to kind of hit you that eventually the Pacific Ocean will show up and you can't run any further?
I think there is that sense. I mean, for the protagonists in the book, since this was the 19th century, there was always another place to run. And another major argument in the book is that people didn't just move east to west, right? They moved in all different directions all the time. And in fact, there's a map at the beginning of the book, but it's not as good as a map that I have that I show when I do talks, because that one is color-coded, and I wish I could animate it. But when you look at it, you see that it's not just this linear move from east to west, like the railroad tracks moving in a straight line. It is a spider web. And people are constantly moving north to south to north, east to west to east, all over the place. And it is a very, very mobile society until really the late 19th century. And that's, as you're saying, when the law comes in, when the federal government starts to really assert its power. And then you start to see, tribal nations whose mobility is an essential part of their culture. How does the U.S. control them? They herd them onto reservations, where they put borders around them and they put a fort with soldiers to surveil them and control them, and they make them stay in one place. And that is not accidental, right? They want them to stay put so that they can control them. And that is the way that the West begins to really change in its essential character in the late 19th century.
You know what's so funny about that is that you get these guys, these kind of posturing guys saying things aren't the way they used to is one of my favorite statements. But the problem is the fact that you realize, of course, that you're the reason why it isn't what it used to was, because you're
yes.
You like the old days when the Native American just kind of rolled into town to do some trade, and you love all that stuff. But you're the guys who passed the law that put them in a way that they couldn't water. You're the one that took that away. And this becomes another meta thing about vanishing. When you take natives and put them in one particular area, you open up space, but then the space is only filled with cattle. I mean, the idea that every empty place really wasn't always empty. Something got removed or something changed its route. And in so many ways that, the very people who bemoan the fact that the West is no longer wild, if it ever was, in the way that they think about it, they're the very people who created the space. And do you feel like some of the efforts that have been made in the last 20 or 25 years to kind of refill it to a lot, to given Gorsuch's, decision on the Cherokee situation and all this, that there is an attempt to kind of, well, what if we let the the shrubbery grow a little bit? What if we let 1,000 flowers bloom here? Can we reappear the world in the West? Can the West reinvent itself yet again and make the things that have disappeared reappear?
Kind of a rewilding effort. Yeah. I mean, that is an extremely interesting proposition. And I know that when I have talked to Indigenous people about the prospect of something like the Land Back movement, where either you are restoring historic homelands to tribal nations or you're giving over national park sites to Native peoples, one of the things they always say is, well, that's all well and good, but how are we going to run this? We don't have enough of a population to actually run the park. And are you going to then give us money to run it like the federal government does through the National Park Service? Or are you just going to say, oh, you can have it back. Okay, go. Which is it's another form of very problematic oppression, because basically they're saying, okay, here it is, but we're not going to give you any help with it. and so many tribal nations are like, no, we don't want to run Mesa Verde. Like, we don't have the money to do that. We don't have the people to do it. We don't have the bandwidth to do it. And so there's a little controversy about that, actually, among Indigenous people about what's the actual reality of what would that process actually look like if all that land kind of reverted to Indigenous ownership. And in some ways, I think it would be fantastic. And in other ways, it would be super problematic.
Well, and it's the same problem that the British had in the aftermath of the decolonization of India. The idea that, if you leave, you have to leave the revenue streams as well, too. That's the thing that nobody ever understands. If you leave and you put us, that's why I think the whole thing with casinos has been a little bit easier. You're giving us a revenue stream. We can increase the peace. And I don't just mean the peace in regards to settling old issues, but a piece of the action. And that's always a big thing. If you're leaving somebody a husk or a hub, it's like, you're not leaving me anything here. And that's crazy. Now, Megan, I know this because you actually lived out in California for a while. I know that you are not adverse, as somebody who writes books the way you do, to traveling, to being out there on the road. So I have to ask, at any point during your adventures or in the researching of the books and the going and the doing, did you ever encounter any sort of ghost stories, either from a tribal or from what I call a Westerner nature? Did you ever encounter any sort of stories that really kind of put the spook on you in the good way, where it's like, I really love that story, not just the immediate details of it, but what it means? And were there any encounters you had on the road out there doing research or digging into things that left you kind of unsettled? And I asked two questions, so I will return to the second one and actually ask the second one.
Well, I think the unsettled one might be a little bit better. I have a better answer for that, at least. I did go, especially for Three Cornered War. I went... that was my first book with Scribner, my first Western book. And I drove all over the Southwest to do research for that book. And I went to a lot of the sites that appear in the book. And what I think is always very interesting is that a lot of these Civil War sites in the Southwest still exist. And they exist in situ, almost entirely unaltered. Except for natural change. And that's precisely because they are in the middle of nowhere. And so they do not get many visitors. Many of them are preserved by a kind of mishmash of institutions, Bureau of Land Management, state historic sites, sometimes National Park Service.
And folks who just kind of love that shit.
Yeah, exactly. And so you'll have people running the place who are kind of living there in a Winnebago, and they're fully volunteers and they're doing all of this. But one of the places I went was Apache Pass, and that is in southern Arizona. And it was a site of a couple of military engagements between U.S. troops and the Chiricahua Apaches under Mangus Coloradus and Cochise in 1862. And it's up in the mountains. It is a pass. And that was where the Butterfield Overland Mail route went. and it was the only Apache Spring was at the top, and that was the only water source within 60 miles. So you had to go through it. And it, when that happens, it becomes a convening site in the Southwest, which means that everybody goes there. And so everyone is vulnerable, right? So it was a site that the U.S. wanted to take control of, that the Chiricahua had control of. And so it was a really important site. So I did all my research. I was like, how do I get to this place? And I was driving, my sedan through the Southwest with my bike on the back. And there were two ways to get to Apache Pass. You either drove 8 miles over a dirt road that crossed a couple of arroyos, and then you parked at a sign and hiked up for 1.5 miles. Or you drove up a road that the Park Service actually, they had a warning. It was a much shorter road. It was paved, but the last 800 meters were just rocks. And they had a warning where they said, this road has been known to puncture car tires. And I was like, well, what? Sure. And so and this is southern Arizona. This is pretty remote. And so I called Dan, my husband, before I got off the highway in Bowie, Arizona. And I said, I'm going in. If I don't call you in 3 hours, here's the number for the Park Service at Apache Pass at the site. Tell them to come and find me. So I was sort of unsettled about how I was actually going to get to this place. And I was myself afraid of disappearing in some dreadful way or getting stuck. And also, I should note that the paved path also went by the site of an active cult. So I was like, what if I get stuck or I blow a tire and the only people who come to help me are these cult people?
The love bombing will soon arrive, by the way. By the way, I'm going to tell you, based on my research of vanishings and strange disappearances, you actually set yourself up for success not to have a strange disappearance because you made a very responsible phone call. You called your husband, said, here's where I am. Here are the details if anything goes wrong. The number of times I did research on people's vanishings where people were like, oh, that's odd. Let me go check that out. And then the phone hangs up and nobody ever hears from them again. The number of times it's like these strange, either like cryptic like numbers come out of people's mouths, or it's an irregular oil spill on the water. We're going to fly down a little bit lower. Never heard from them again. Nobody ever went like, I am exactly here. Here are my coordinates. If anything goes wrong, this is where I'm going to be. Nobody who's ever disappeared, Megan, ever frames it where they give you an exact location. But at any point during that ride over the rocks, were you just like literally white knuckling it? I mean, were your hands like gripping the steering wheel?
Well, I chose the other route, Jimmy. I drove the 8 miles through.
I'd have done the same thing.
The dirt and the arroyos, and I gunned the car through the arroyos because I was so afraid. They were dry. This was September, so it was, it was not monsoon season. But I was like, oh my God, can you even imagine? How would where does the tow truck come from? I don't even know. So I was gunning it through these arroyos, and I went up and I parked. But that too was a little bit, because I'm sure, you've had the experience where you go up and you park at a hiking parking lot, and it's, the sign is there and you're just the only one there. But then you're like, am I the only one here?
Am I the only one here?
This is very weird. But and luckily it was quite a beautiful day and not too terribly hot. But I was also a tiny bit worried because, you were hiking up and you're at elevation in that part of Arizona. So I think I was going up to around 5,000 feet at the top of the pass. And it wasn't an aggressive hike. It was a nice path. And they had lots of really great, actually, signage about not only natural features of the place, but also Chiricahua, lifeways. And then they also had a lot of ruins. And then there was a cemetery because...
By the By the way, Colorado, I'm thinking about Colorado. Colorado has some of the creepiest Western cemeteries I've ever been to in my life, where it's like, I've been on the outskirts of things, but in the Southwest, in the Cochise area down in the Arizona, New Mexico, all of those areas, when you come upon a cemetery, it's like, I don't know what it is. It just feels like the landscape it's like a speaker system for it. I feel like the skies of the West become a speaker system of a sort. Megan, we're going to run out of time here. You've given me so much, but I'm kind of curious. You got a big business venture that you have just launched that I think people need to hear about because it really is a really cool and groovy thing. Tell us about that before we tell you goodbye.
Well, this also has to do with Vanishing, because I'm not sure if you notice this at all, Jimmy, but the coverage of history nonfiction books has been vanishing for the past couple of years in major newspapers and magazines. I mean, it was never great to begin with. Only really about 10% of reviews in newspapers and magazines were devoted to nonfiction, and most of that was memoir or political books. And so, kind of the space for history nonfiction and national coverage was always pretty lean. But then, the Washington Post fired its entire book review section, like the entire vertical.
There is a Washington Post?
I know. It's whatever it is now, the newspaper formerly known as the Washington Post. And the AP announced it was, going to stop publishing book reviews. And so my friend Kate and I, who has a podcast called Drafting the Past, where she talks to historians about their writing craft, we're discussing this and we're like, well, is there anything that we can do? And we decided that there is. And so we are launching, technically part of it this week, but mostly officially in October, a site also called Drafting the Past, which will publish a book review each week. This is where we're going to start. We hope to publish many more in the future if we can. And then features about history book writing. And then we'll continue to host Kate's podcast and maybe a couple others. But really what we want to do is make people aware, people who are interested, of all the history books that are worth reading, that are out there, because there are so many, and it's so important, I think, for people to be reading good history, and well-written history, narrative history that really pulls you along and immerses you in the past. We need those books now. We need to have that, both the knowledge and then also the kind of immersive quality of those books.
Well, and there's something about that too that people don't realize, is that there's all kinds of ways and interesting approaches to writing books, fiction, not fictional history, but history that really has the feel and the kind of energy of fictional. I mean, the way that you write, our mutual friend Peter, our mutual friend Matthew, these are folks who are writing stories that don't just be like one damn thing after another, but sees the world in different ways. And like I said, it's interesting that vanishing is the topic that we're talking about today. But it's one of those places, too, what's disturbing for me is that there's an interest in this, is that there are people who love this stuff. There's lots of men and women who love this kind of work, who love these kind of books. And it just feels like, well, it doesn't get clicks. And you're like, but that's, would you rather have, as I've told John Gunner before, John Guidry, and all points in between, I said this, I said, would you rather have 1,000 people who are willing to spend hard-earned money and be a member of a community, or just have tens of thousands of people who need a hit of adrenaline or dopamine? And that's just like, I feel like what you're doing. Tell people again one more time the name of the site, where they can go, because I'm going to be signing up for it.
Yes. So the site will go live tomorrow, actually, on August 13th. And it's called Drafting the Past. So it's at www.draftingthepast.com. And you'll find information there about Kate and about me and about what our mission is, and then also options to subscribe to the newsletter or to sign up for free.
Megan Kate Nelson, I hope you don't vanish anytime soon. I hope you will come back. Thank you, by the way. Megan is actually working with us on an Audible here. Had to do some rescheduling because I'm going to Providence soon. But Megan, thank you. You can find out all of Megan's details, by the way. They will be in the comment section, all of our socials and all the groovy places where you can buy books like The Westerners, Saving Yellowstone, and The Three-Cornered War. Thank you, Megan Kate.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. It's great to see you.
Good to see you, too. Drivers love As Asleep because they wake up refreshed. and mostly in possession of their own identity. Do not take as asleep if you suspect you've been followed home by your own body. Consult a physician if your friends begin insisting that you're not yourself. As asleep, the sleep aid trusted by people who prefer to remain themselves. Hey guys, don't forget that all episodes of Gauge Illuminations are brought to you by NeuroPep. Stay alive, stay awake, notice things. And all of those products, including NeuroPep and As Asleep, are a product of Red Hook Labs Corporation. Here's to you guys. Let's talk about Waymo, shall we? Not been a good year for those fellas. Not a good year at all. In February of 2026, it was discovered that there were people behind the scenes, possibly driving some of those Waymo driverless vehicles, almost like kids playing Atari back in the day. Now, Waymo tried to clarify, saying, no, they're there for assistance and to monitor the vehicles and to make sure everything is okay. So you're telling us there was no time when people actually were kind of making sure that things did what they're supposed to do? It gets worse. It turns out that recently, also in the city of San Francisco, there was an incident, the 2 a.m. incident, that actually plays into the weird news of the road. The 2 a.m. incident was a moment in San Francisco when hundreds, if not thousands, of Waymo cars started honking simultaneously, filling up the city, well, the city by the bay, with a lot of bleats and a lot of honks and a lot of people getting woken up in the middle of the night. Okay, that sets up what comes on September 3rd. It's just around the bend, as a matter of fact. And then there was the cul-de-sac incident in Atlanta, when the number of Waymos that were flying through suburban neighborhoods, people put up cones to have the thing slow down and maybe drive a little more cautious, and instead it ended up causing 40, 50, 60 car pileups of Waymo vehicles in suburban neighborhoods where nobody could get out of their driveway and nobody could maneuver around it. Things weren't going well for Waymo. Waymo's got some good news, or they think at least. The Ojai Robotaxi is actually making its debut this week. 18 counties all across California, which sets up a corridor where a Waymo driverless can go all the way from San Francisco Bay to San Diego, by the way. They've got places setting up in Houston, places setting up in Denver, but they've got all kinds of issues that people want to talk about right now. A lot of complaints, and a lot of those cities involve, well, the parking noise. There's a great deal of noise made when it parks. And the biggest complaint about Waymos and AI vehicles in general is, well, you guessed it, they hog curbsides. They hog curbsides, and we have a number of friends who actually make a very good living in the rideshare business. They constantly complain because there is no one to write a ticket to, that often AI vehicles, Waymo included, don't get the kind of tickets that those who are actually living and breathing behind the wheel get, because a lot of the police don't know how to deal with it, setting up an unfair advantage where they can hog up curbs and prevent pickups from happening, almost forcing people to get in those Waymos. September 3rd, I gave you that day because the San Francisco City Council is actually having a meeting dedicated to only AI automated vehicles in the city of San Francisco. This is what's interesting to me. I've often talked about the fact that one of the things that drives me crazy about a lot of the ways that people who claim to want to save the planet or be conservationists often engage in what I call a strategy of, you need to eat your broccoli and you need to hate it. I've often thought that Elon Musk's great appeal in the beginning was he said, we're going to save the world and we're going to have a blast doing it. Now things have changed. Controversial figure now. We won't talk about that. But there really is a sense that it also pollutes the system, and the idea that when you tell people to eat better and you say they should only eat tofu, they end up hating everything that they should eat to make it better. Like, avocado is terrific. Avocado with a little bit of blue cheese and a little bit of olive oil and some nice greens, that's a terrific meal. But because you think it's good for you, and the good for you people say it's good for you, you don't want to eat it. It also causes, like I said, that kind of confusion. Here's the confusion. The number of truck drivers I have spoken to who conflate AI, automated trucking, and automated vehicles with electric trucking and electric vehicles is staggering to me. It's horrifying. And the reason it's so horrifying to me is that, do you know the lifestyle improvement if we got an entire electrical fleet on the road, if we electrified the entire grid, how much longer and more comfortably truck drivers would be able to do their job, how longer it would take for their bodies to wear down, if at all? Electric vehicles mean less damage to your ears, less damage to your tuchus, less damage to your body overall, and a cleaner, easier ride. But because so many people have conflated electric vehicles with AI, we're now fighting a war on two fronts to make the planet a safer, easier place, and we can't even make sure that we actually get on board natural allies like truckers would be. So here's the thing. Make a point of supporting new technologies, but only after they've done the diligence to actually test them and make sure that they're safe and they aren't cutting into actual jobs of actual human beings and the quality of life. I always thought technology was supposed to improve the quality of life, not wake you up with an unintentional alarm clock on four wheels at 2 o'clock in the morning and not block up your cul-de-sac with, well, I guess, the motor equivalent of Skynet. And that's your weird news of the road. Part 1. We'll be back with more on the highway on Gauge Illuminations. Gauge Illuminations is proudly brought to you by NeuroPep. Did you miss that exit? Don't worry, there's always another route with NeuroPep. NeuroPep is not intended to prevent encounters with elder things, shoggoths, impossible geology, biker clubs that apparently have been riding since the Permian era. Look, side effects do include improved route planning, healthier respect for maps, and refusing to investigate strange tracks in fresh snow. Stay alert, guys. Take NeuroPep. There's so many of these stories that it's almost kind of impossible to wrangle any sort of like coherence in regards to like specific like tropes in regards to what people talk about on Reddit threads and all that kind of stuff. So I thought I would share a couple of other true stories with you that are kind of really worth digging into. Most famous, of course, is D.B. Cooper. The last person to actually see him alive was Tina Mucklow, who was the 22-year-old stewardess on board the plane and the only person that actually stayed with him in sight from pillar to post. He put the flight crew in the cockpit. He only worked through her. She's the one that made the arrangements to have the $200,000 and the parachute waiting for him in Seattle, where he picked it up. And of course, while leaving Seattle is when he and the $200,000 kind of made their way out of the plane. For him never to be seen again. And I've always felt that the kind of, law enforcement agencies saying, well, he obviously died. I think that's people who got beat. I don't think he may have died, but I don't think anybody really knows what happens to D.B. Cooper. And I think that a lot of that kind of trying to spread the rumor that he got away with it, that he actually didn't get away with it, is an attempt to prevent copycats. I get it. If they really had evidence he died, they would have given us evidence that he died. D.B. Cooper, by the way, is also celebrated because despite the fact that he's a genuine outright thief, was incredibly polite, promised that if all his demands were met, he would treat everybody as well as he could and release everybody. It's exactly what he did. And he said that once they jump out the plane, you're free to turn around and go back to Seattle, which they did. It's a story well worth getting into. It's also a story well worth diving down the rabbit hole because so many people kind of joyously root for him in that story. I kind of do too. And he's played by the late, great Treat Williams in the movie version of it. Williams is terrific. Wish the movie been a little bit better, but Williams is every bit of charm you need to actually pull off a role and make it kind of sympathetic. Well worth checking out. The creepy story worth kind of diving into that still has no answers and may only have been resolved by the passage of time is Polly Melton, who disappeared near the Great Smoky Mountains on the Deep Creek Trail. Made mention of her earlier. But Melton's story is kind of fascinating because literally two people saw her, like really close to her, moments before she disappeared. So she's working with Trula Goodyear and Pauline Red Cannon, which is perfect. I mean, listen to these women's names. They're all a bunch of over 50s ladies. They're walking this very, very easy trail. From all accounts, it's a beautiful day. And Melton goes around a corner. Well, she speeds up at first. I'm like, man, Polly's hoofing it. She gets ahead of them, smokes a cigarette, waves, walks around the corner, and they never see her again. And man, if you look up Polly Melton and theories, you are going to put yourself in an absolute speculation whirlwind. I mean, there are versions where she's kidnapped on the side of the road. There are versions where it's an entire getaway plot based on her wanting to get away from her alien husband and their trailer park life. It goes on and on. There are sightings of her. People claim to have seen her. She pops up everywhere. And these kind of stories literally populate the internet, and they're really worth getting into. There are some famous disappearances of housewives in the late 50s and early 60s from grocery store parking lots, which, by the way, I don't know if you could pull off now with all the kind of cameras that are everywhere. But there's a lot of speculation. A lot of these women just said, that's it. I've had enough. I'm going to take a walk out of my life. I'm done with this. I'm done with this either stultifying or abusive relationship in. I'm going to hit the road. Adios, my friends. Pack my bags, and you'll never see me again. By the way, that is a quote from the late, great, redemptive poet of love and loss, Greg Allman. That being said, there is one more story that you guys should look up, but I'm not going to talk about it, but I want to get something going because we may do a later show on it. Paula Jean Weldon disappeared on Vermont's Long Trail, and she is one of 10 mysterious disappearances on that trail over a 5-year period. And that in and of itself, there are spaces in this country, not just people, but spaces where people go, not just the Bermuda Triangle, but the Bennington Triangle. You should look that up, by the way, as well, too. And the Bridgewater Triangle. These spaces that contain, strange swamps or rocky trails or ghost towns where people walk in and they never walk out. And if that's the way you kind of like to give yourself the creeps, as I told you at the top of the show, I do. There is a lot of really fun of giving yourself that lingering feeling of unease by simply looking up a few key vanishings. Whether it's the joyful kind of he got away with it of D.B. Cooper, or the I have no idea what happened with Polly Melton, or the beginning of a mystery, as you'll find with Paula Jean Weldon. A vanishing can make a great story around the campfire, and it can make a great chill before you go to bed. Don't ever forget, Gauge Illuminations is brought to you by NeuroPep. If your co-driver says, I think I found an ancient city beneath the ice, it's a good time to take your 10-hour break someplace warmer, preferably somewhere with a functioning road system and quick access to NeuroPep. NeuroPep. Some expeditions should stay on the map. Okay, so we talked about, big corporations in our last News of the Weird Road. This one is a little more personal and a little more down to earth. Actually, it almost removed a house from the face of the earth. Kim Snyder considers herself an incredibly lucky woman. She lived at Cherry Street and Farm Road, 197 over in Missouri. And this is the word from KY3 News, 5 o'clock edition. On Wednesday, August the 5th, a man behind the wheel of an SUV suffered some sort of medical emergency, and when he actually stroke, heart attack, whatever it was, causing him to lose control of the car. There should have been kids playing in the garage that he struck. He struck a home and knocked it off of its foundation, pancaked the garage where the kids were normally playing. Some miraculous reason they weren't there that day. It was such a bad situation that the fire department and first responders had to be rushed out there to fix the foundation of the house on struts, lest it slide off and down a slope, off a ledge. God knows what could have happened. Big shout out to all the first responders in Missouri who remind us when we spend a little bit of time off the internet and only enough time to find out the good things, you can find out about the great folks over in Missouri who saved the day and, kept the foundational issues under control. And that's your weird news of the road. Ever find yourself putting on those chains for a shortcut no GPS has ever heard of? Following a convoy that doesn't appear on that Qualcomm, watching a pack of black dogs pace your headlights across Wyoming. Take NeuroPep before accepting directions from anyone wearing antique winter gear. NeuroPep helps drivers distinguish between snowdrifts, whiteouts, and prehistoric civilizations that really should have stayed buried. Stay alert, stay awake, notice things. NeuroPep. Normally, I would say that the person I'm talking to next needs no introduction. I feel like I've introduced him on numerous occasions and continue to do so to this very day. Let us just say his recent book, The Lost Cities of El Norte, Coronado's Quest, The Unconquered West, and the Birth of American Indian Resistance, needs to be on your must-read list, as do his books Young Washington and one of my personal favorites, The Last Empty Places. Peter Stark is an author. He is an adventurer. He is a dreamer. And he is also the co-host with me, when I can get off my ass and do it, of Last Empty Places podcast. He joins us from Montana, as he often does. Hey, Peter, good evening. How are you, sir?
Very well, very well. It's a little smoky up here in Montana with some forest fires burning off in the mysterious west in the Oregon country.
Let me ask you something really quickly, too, because it sets us up really nicely. The number of people who will disappear in something like a forest fire, the number of people who will kind of evaporate from the landscape in mudslides and changes in weather and changes of condition. One of the things this show is about a lot of mysterious vanishings and disappearances. But you could make a case, couldn't you, that the wilderness doesn't need the help of aliens or supernatural spirits to make people simply go poof and smoke, right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, literally sometimes we just today received a really sad news that a childhood classmate of our kids, Molly and Skylar, was a wilderness firefighter, and he just got caught and died fighting a fire in wildfire in Idaho. So that's quite a shock, and it's literally true that you can vanish in the wilderness in ways that are so unexpected, and there's such power in the wilderness that it's really easy to underestimate that power when you're in a city all the time. And wildfire is one of the most powerful forces that exists on this planet. It's just inescapable. And just to fight it, you really have to know what you're doing. But, a change in wind direction or, fire behavior, they call it, it's wiped out many, many people. And I mean, literally vanish. So that is one very visceral example, right in the here and now. And there are many other people who, as you say, Jimmy Mack, that they literally disappear. I mean, literally. And they are never heard from again. And they are never found. And that's one of the profound mysteries of the wilderness.
Let me ask you, because you're actually an expert on the Donner Party. We can set that up here for a second here. Well, actually, you know a great deal. I know that you often are loath to claim yourself an expert in anything, but you know a great deal about the Donner Party, and the idea that part of the supernatural that is ascribed to the wilderness is because we didn't understand as much then. We'll talk about the Donner Party in a second, but you wrote another book called Last Breath, and I want you to kind of talk about that. And to talk about what that book's about and how that book is structured, to kind of give a sense of what awaits even sometimes the most experienced adventurers and explorers when they get out there.
So that book, Last Breath, came out in 2001. And essentially I think it's 11 chapters. And in each chapter profiles or tracks the arc of a fictitious character. One's a rock climber, a whitewater kayaker, cross-country skier going into the woods on a very cold night, a young guy trekking in the Sahara Desert. So these various situations I created, and these characters who each had some compelling reason to go into these wilderness situations. And they knew they were heading into, maybe a tough situation or maybe not. Actually, a lot of them thought it wasn't going to be that tough. It's just a
day. Some of them just are going to have a good fun day.
Yeah, it was just a day. Exactly. Right. Just a day. But each one's a little different, the arc of it. But they tend to make a series of small mistakes in a wilderness situation, and those mistakes add up to real disaster. One character comes very close to freezing to death. He's like literally frozen stiff. Another one almost dies of dehydration. Another one, a bicycle racer in the summer, dies of heat stroke. There's a character who dies from a box jellyfish sting, the most deadly toxin in the world, off the coast of Australia. Another dies. He's really kind of a jerk. I made this character kind of a jerk. He's like a real type A, push it to the max, egotistical rock climber. And he goes on a solo climb, and he falls, and he lands on a ledge with a broken leg. But he doesn't know he also has now I'm forgetting the technical medical name for it, but essentially it's an embolism of the heart, and it's like having a big balloon in an artery near the heart, and one little too much pressure, like blood pressure, can pop that embolism and you die instantly, which is what happens in his case when he yells, survives the night, and yells the next day, "I'm alive, I'm still here." And that was like, bam, off, blood pressure high, pops the embolism, guy's dead. And so what I do is, that was sort of a satisfying one. But what I do is, with these fictitious characters and these fictitious situations, they're in real wilderness settings. This is deeply researched, very much, and some of which I've experienced, these wilderness settings, which end up being extreme wilderness situations. And I've traced that science very accurately and with great detail, the physiology of someone who's like literally freezing to death, someone who's dying of thirst, someone who's drowning. I mean, that's a brutal one. So, as you say, each of these characters steps into something that, for them, they're experienced wilderness people. These are not just like, some random person who's never been outside of a city before. These are people who are experienced and passionate about their activities, but they just take a step too far, or one or two steps too far, and we see the profound power of wilderness.
One of the really cool things, and the reason why I asked you to talk about the book, I got two questions for you. We'll start with the one that actually relates directly to Gauge Illuminations. I've talked about how, when you're putting together your own version of an urban legend, when you're telling an urban legend or a myth, there's a certain level of expertise you need to bring to it. Like, you need to master certain details. And each one of these stories, in many ways, has resemblances to the structure of an urban legend or an urban myth. What they've got inside of them, though, is the accuracy of the details, meaning the stories themselves, the character that sits at the center of the story is fictional. But it's almost like you do this, the Odyssey's on everybody's mind, that moment of pause where somebody's on a bike, or somebody's on a cliff, or somebody's in a bad situation and they begin to fall off the bike, they realize their tongue is beginning to thicken, and you'll stop and go, I suppose you wonder how this happened. Okay, so let's kind of talk in detail about what happens to a tongue when it begins to shrink. And I was kind of wondering if, given the fact that these are fictional stories with absolute science to back them up, in the same way the first Viking, that book about the Vikings, where they found the woman's bones and they created a fictional life around her. I was wondering, in regards to, as a storyteller, it's 2001, how much better of a storyteller did it make you moving forward? Because a lot of your books are kind of famous for talking about, as I've said before, how much grain the horses need to eat. And I was kind of curious about that, but I was also curious about the fact that you realize that each one of these first is a horror story, is a scary story. The one in the snow is terrifying. It's even got an hallucination moment in it.
Well, and you're so insightful about the structure of stories and ghost stories. You had another Gauge Illumination post recently where you really discussed the structure of ghost stories and what elements each one needed. And I found that fascinating. And yeah, I mean, I did learn so much writing that book, kind of unintentionally. And what, it's like, well, how do you make as you say, how do you make a scary story? And how do you make a really compelling story? I learned a lot of that from personal experience when, I first started as a young journalist and I started writing for Outside Magazine. I put myself in these, wilderness or extreme sports situations. And when I realized, it's like, well, it has to be scary or people aren't that interested in reading it. Or, it's that the reader puts him or herself in the author narrator's shoes. And so everybody's traveling on this journey together with the author narrator who, in these earlier days was me, putting myself in an extreme situation. And that it's kind of like I had to learn to do it. I always was going out and doing adventures and trips on my own it's from the time I was like 12 or 13, or with my friends, we tried to, 4 of us, I was 13 and the other 3 guys were 14. We were going to paddle the length of the Wisconsin River, which is 400 miles. And I was amazed, it's like thinking back on it, my parents were all behind us going out and having a wilderness adventure. And we were all experienced with canoes and camping, but 4 guys between the ages of 13 and 14 on a 400-mile canoe trip by themselves, that's kind of extreme right there.
Welcome to the 60s, my brother. Welcome to the 60s.
Yeah, well, that is exactly right. And we two of them bailed out at day 3. They were in the same canoe and didn't get along. And my buddy Stephen Moss and I kept going, but we went 10 days, and 10 hard days, portaging a lot of dams and whatnot. So to get back to my point, that when I came back from that trip, this is what happened. I came back from that trip and my parents really wanted to know what happened. I mean, it was the first time I ever realized that they were really engrossed in what I was saying. And I was telling these stories about what happened on this trip and, how the 2 guys who quit, how that drama went, and then all the other various dramas you have in any, outdoors wilderness situation over that length of time. And they were just like on the edge of their seats at the dinner table. And so it might have been in that moment when I realized that, this is kind of what I do. And it wasn't conscious at the time, but it was sort of my mode of communication, it's sort of my favorite groove of communication without me really knowing it. Until I got older and started writing and into journalism. And then I started doing my own first person adventures. And it was like, this is something that came really naturally to me. However, when I wrote my first piece for Outside Magazine, and I've told you about it, it's called Leaps of Faith. And this is in 1984. I think it came out in January of 85, but it was actually took place in 83, 84. That Outside said, "Oh yeah, what a great idea. Why don't you go up with those old Norwegian ski jumpers and try to learn to ski jump and launch yourself off a ski jump and write a story about it?" That's what I proposed. And they say, "Yeah, go do it, man. That's just what we love." Of course, they wouldn't pay for it or commission it until they seen the story. And so I did this, and it was like a wild experience, and there were great characters, and it was scary. I mean, it was really scary. Like lying awake in the middle of the night, kind of scary. And so when I wrote a draft of that story, and I had, a number of friends who were good writers, who had MFAs and very experienced writers. So when I got back to Missoula and started writing a draft of the story, I really, I put serious time and attention in it. And then I asked one of my writer friends, my older veteran writer friends, to read this draft. And he was sure, yeah, I'll read it. And so I don't know, a week later, he invites me out for a drink at this cool old bar that was in a railroad station by the river. And he gets there before I do, and he's sitting at the bar, and he has my manuscript on the bar in front of him. And he says, "Pull up a stool, son. We got some things to talk about." And basically it was like, dude, you're missing the whole point of the story, that, you have to draw out the drama. You don't just skip over it. You draw out every little moment of it. So it was especially the moment when I was standing atop the big ski jump for the first time, and, big, scary situation. And I'd said, well, I'd written in the draft, well, and then I pushed off and I went. And he said, no. When you're in that situation, you describe every single detail, every thought. I adjusted my goggles. I did this. I did that. I thought that. And he said, that is where you focus your attention. And, that's been a lifelong lesson for me from this friend called Steve Krauser, who died some years ago, but he wrote Westerns, among other things. And so he loved genre literature, detective stories and Western, popular Westerns. And he wrote some movies too, but he was a master at that. And he took my, kind of lame attempt at writing this adventure story, and I'd written some, newspaper feature adventure stories before, but, this had to be taken to an entirely different level, because Outside Magazine had a very high bar. And so, I spent another 2 months writing a draft after that. And, I really put everything I had into it. And that's how I learned how to, in effect, spin what we're calling, spin a ghost story, as we're calling it, that the moments of anticipation are the most important moments. It's not so much the moment of realization. It's the moment, the many moments, increasingly tense, leading up to that moment of realization. Those are the things where you have to pay attention as a storyteller.
It's funny. My epiphany came actually when I thought about the word too long. I thought about suspense. I kid you not. My real breakthrough came. I thought about I said suspense. Well, what exactly does that mean? I'm like, well, to suspend. And I thought,
Oh,
is that
right.
just like withholding information to suspend the revelation of the moment for as long as possible, and if it's bearable, and now there's a point where you get to what I call the comical version of suspense, where you never get to the reveal.
Right.
And that can become comedy, but it's figuring out how far you can extend the amount of information you include, provided that the audience knows, the reader knows, that he or she knows that our destination is momentous. It could be disastrous, could be triumphant, but the idea that nobody likes the 3-foot putt for the win. People like the 20-foot putt that gets right to the edge of the hole and then wavers there for a moment and then finally drops in. That's
Exactly.
what people enjoy that. And I was kind of curious, Peter. We talked about this in our own podcast with Malcolm Brooks and The Sun Also Rises. Was there somebody that you read, though, at the same time when you were kind of developing the style, where I don't want to say you emulate them. I said there's a moment where I call it a permission slip, where you're telling stories, you want to tell stories, and then you read somebody and go, oh, wait, you can do that? It's about that moment of, wait, you can write like that? It could be like at 9 or it could be at 18 or 30. It doesn't make any difference.
Well, yeah, I had a couple of or several different permission slips, so to speak, in that era in the 70s and early 80s. And one was, I'd grown up in high school loving fiction and novels and poetry, and that I was aspiring to that. And I thought, well, nonfiction journalism is just kind of flat. It's like limited. And eventually when I did go into journalism, when I went to grad school, but I started reading, well, even before that, but I started reading some of the really great nonfiction writers of the mid, 20th century. But um, Peter Matheson and now I'm going to space out all the names. I'm going to have to pause and come back to that. But I realized that there's a whole genre that was really developing then. Like another example is Hunter Thompson, Tom Wolfe.
Well, the new journalism stuff. Yeah.
The new journalism. But there was also kind of the older journalism, it was New Yorker style, some of the long pieces that I realized that there was a lot of creativity that some of these writers put into their nonfiction pieces. And it showed a lot of direction. For example, I mentioned Peter Matheson. His book, The Snow Leopard, is a nonfiction account of going with a wildlife biologist to the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau to find the last surviving snow leopards. And yet it's also this journey of emotional trauma. His wife has recently died of cancer, and I think, I can't remember if they maybe they had been divorced, or things had not gone well with their marriage, and yet he was processing all of that. And so and then there's this whole Tibetan Buddhism aspect and this whole wildlife aspect. And he wove between those different threads of this, great adventure story on the Tibetan Plateau and in the Himalayas, and this quest looking for a snow leopard, and also this deep personal reflection of what happened in my life just now that was so profoundly emotional. And I read that book and it was like, wow, this is a revelation. And, I kind of never came back from that.
It's interesting because this all actually leads us back to Vanishing, in the sense you talk about, the Tibetan monks, and you talk about people who are actually going into really extreme empty places. And the idea that why do people vanish, I think sometimes it's because they can. And I don't mean because they want to, but I mean when you put yourself into that kind of open space, talk about the idea. Like I said, I don't think people understand this from looking at a map, Peter. But like I said, one of the reasons why I think your writing often makes it creepier is that it's all done factually. It's all done assembled with facts and information and science. And yet people still disappear and are never seen again. And, to talk about why that happens, especially as we get less and less experienced explorers, about the idea about getting lost and what it means to simply go away and never be found again. We talk a little bit about this on our own show, but why is it, do you think, that people, despite everything we know now, continue to kind of go, without deliberately meaning to do it, poof, and they're gone?
That's a really cool observation, that you made about sort of what I write or the way I write things. And of course, I'm not the only one by far who does this, but it's that I never had quite thought of it in quite that way. But writing about the interface of hard factual reality, one world, and where it meets the mysterious and the totally unknown. And that's the margin that I literally work. And you are totally right.
That margin, by the way, is where I think people vanish, because there is a point where we lose the scent. You know what I'm saying? That there are
Right.
so many things between a person walking into the wilderness and their moment of disappearance. We forget that there are fires, there's snow, there are wild animals. Remember, none of these things may have touched them. They simply come after them. And you begin to put stuff in the way that allows us to lose any trace of a person out there. And so I'm wondering, in your own adventures, to kind of let our listeners know, because there have been moments, we talk about it on our own show, there have been moments where you suddenly realize to yourself, oh, this is how people disappear and never get seen again. Do you have a moment like that? We've talked about a few of them already.
Yeah, we talked about that African river. Then I was with, a group of people, and we could all disappear and never have been seen again.
Well, talk about that African river, because we haven't talked about that in a while, actually, and it would be kind of nice to touch on what that experience was like. That story is how people vanish, Peter. That's exactly the story how people vanish.
Yeah, and a lot of people have vanished that way in the African wilderness. A lot of Europeans and Euro Americans types who have taken on the challenge of traveling into the African wilderness. There's a long tradition of them not coming out the other side.
I was wondering, by the way, since we literally get Heart of Darkness out of that, the idea that it takes us in there. Do you think, and this is an important part, do you think that part of the vanishings that do occur because people get out there and the space and the light and the depth and the openness kind of put the zap on their brain? Because you do that in your, part of Coronado's story. Was he hit in the head? Did he have a head injury? Did he go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs? What exactly it is that you think puts that space puts people, that disorients people, genuinely disorients them?
I think there are no familiar reference points in every way, not only geographically, but emotionally. And so that you're in a way at a, I don't want to say featureless, but it's almost like perspectiveless landscape that, you might be able to see things, but you can't place them in context because you don't know what the context is. And so that's part of the mystery of the unknown. And the vanishing is all a part of that same arc of the story that I think a lot of people who are in those situations have put themselves there intentionally. And that there's this compulsion that they have to visit that margin between the factual and the unknown and the mystery. And what happens on that margin, it's in a way, it's like walking along the edge of a cliff. And, it can go along quite well for a long time, and it's like incredible thrilling, huge drop on one side and this spectacular landscape on the other, or whatever it is. And then, like one misstep, and that's a whole, this individual is dropping 1,000 feet to hard ground. And so I think that's what is compelling about that interface between the hard factual world and the unknown is the in a way, the ease, the kind of surprising and frightening ease with which one can slip over that edge.
But there's a profundity to that. The idea that there are two things in there I want to kind of touch on real quick. The idea that you get out to a place that you've never seen before, in an environment that you've never seen before. That alone, as we've said, seeing the Grand Canyon, seeing the Rocky Mountains, going through Donner Pass. Nobody had ever those people had never seen anything like that in their lives. That in and of itself can actually disorient you from your direction. The other thing is, too, is we don't, because some of these stories of these disappearances that this show talks about, some of these people are in trouble. Some of these people are not well. Some of these people have bad life going on at home, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think it's interesting to me that sometimes many people vanish, not because they so much go out there with the intent to vanish, but want to see if they can go right to the edge of the vanishing.
Right. Yeah.
Cease to exist.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's a cool observation too.
Yeah. But it's what you talked about, to go someplace where you lose your bearings and you suddenly realize that you're in the middle of think about Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, those spaces, and to kind of go, I know my problems seem insignificant. Maybe I can just evaporate into this.
Right.
And then come back. I don't think a
come
lot of
back,
them think that they won't come back. And I think that's where these kind of disappearances happen, that people think at some point the game will reset and they'll get put back to where they were supposed to get put to. But that's a compelling thought. The idea that the disorientation of space, then followed by the desire to see if I can get right up to the vanishing, right to the edge of the cliff, and then see what happens. I want to talk briefly, as we always do, to promote the hell out of you. What are you working on next? What do you got
good
next?
luck with
Because
that.
you're touring the book now, but what's coming up?
Well, I'm working on the idea for a next book, and I won't totally give it away at this point. I've been talking to my editor about it, and I thought I had it sort of nailed down, and he said, "Well, I think this needs more, more working out." And he said, I liked it when we started talking about this, summary that I sent him of the book idea I had in mind, and then he eventually got back to me, and we had a Zoom call, and he said, his first words were, "I like to pressure an idea." And it was like, okay, that means he's really looking at it for all its weaknesses. And he pointed out where it needed to be strengthened. Um, it has to do with early North American exploration again. It's kind of a sequel to my book Astoria. And it has a very contemporary angle to it. But I'm still putting together those elements. And I don't want to kind of give away the whole thing, one, because I'm not sure what it is, and two, because I'm kind of keeping it a little close to my chest, at least until I hope my editor or someone else buys the idea. But it's exactly what we're talking about as I'm thinking, in the larger context about going right up to the mysterious edge, between the familiar landscapes and the unknown, and then that's like the vanishing line. Well, these guys crossed the vanishing line. We can put it that way, and the story is about their desperate struggle to get back across that line.
To actually, what is it? The undiscovered country from which no traveler returns. And it looks like they were trying to return.
Exactly.
All right, we've only got a few moments left here. I'm going to ask you one. I'm going to frame this for fun. You know a lot about the Donner Party. For you, with a guy who actually has a great deal of information on it, what in particular about the Donner Party has always left you with the creeps? Where it's always been like, man, this is real campfire stuff. And there's so many awful stories about the mistakes made and the hard choices made. But is there anything inside of there that always makes you kind of go, oh, that is something that just will stick with me for a long time?
Well, it's been a while since I've really taken a dive into the Donner Party story, but I did know it very well, not some years ago. But the part that really sticks in my mind is I'm trying to think the sequence. So the main party is trapped on the eastern side of the Sierras in this incredible heavy snow, and they build some kind of huts to try to hang out. I mean, stay alive, and the snow just gets deeper and deeper. And then I think, as I recall, one guy goes to try to make a rescue mission over the Sierras to bring back help, and it's not clear exactly why, but I think there was another party that followed him, and it was more about the desperation to get help. It was not just like, we need some help. It was like, we're all going to die if we don't get help. And that party was made up, I think it was something like 4 men and 3 women or something like that. And there were at least 2 women, and it got to the point where they were all about to die. And it was the women who pulled them out. Somebody was going to shoot somebody and eat somebody. And it was this, like this showdown. And it was like the women who were the who had the toughest instinct for survival out of the whole group. And it's not, I mean, it's not creepy. It's creepy in the way that, you think like these, strong dudes are going to have it figured out, but no, they were going to like die. And it's the women who saves them.
It's actually creepy because the first thought that hits you is if they had left the women behind, if they had done the manly thing you're supposed to do, and it probably ends in tragedy where everybody dies. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that it's like, but it's always funny because, there are so many moments in that terrible story where people don't die if somebody makes one decision or another, starts a trip earlier, decides to go the long route. All of that stuff really points to the nature of vanishing. It's always about one turn in the bend. What is it? It's always a series of decisions that lead you to a place, but even up to a certain point, it's avoidable until the final one is made, and that's the one that takes you over. And I think it gets harder to turn back with each decision because, as you know, backtracking adds time. Claire and I did that once. We actually went out in the wilderness and actually decided to turn back around, go back and retrace our steps, and we were glad we did. I'm always glad to retrace my steps with Peter Stark. You like that awful transition? I'm a fan of it myself. If you guys look down in the comment section here, however you're actually getting this content, you will see all of Peter's wonderful socials and the socials for Gauge Illuminations as well. Peter Stark joins us, as he will do from time to time. You can also check out our podcast, Last Empty Places, where we're currently talking about what it means to get lost in America. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy Mack. That was a fun talk.
Ever pull into a truck stop, look in the mirror, and wonder if you're still the one driving? Before you answer that cab door with a loaded revolver, take NeuroPep. NeuroPep helps hardworking drivers maintain healthy skepticism when confronted with sudden personality changes, friends who suddenly know things they shouldn't, mysterious inheritances, or spouses that insist you become a completely different person. Remember, if someone says, "I've found a way to live forever," lock that cab, maybe keep those windows rolled up, but most of all, drink NeuroPep, because some folks are just dying to be you. So we got a couple of science fiction anniversaries we're celebrating this week. Both of these films have probably disappeared from your imagination, unless, of course, you are a fan of absolute schlock or a fan of, old cinema. The first of which is Thong Girl Volta from Outer Space, from 2014. It ain't been around that long. Most people have already forgotten it. I'm here to kind of remind you that particular film, which, by the way, the title is utterly self-explanatory. It makes Barbarella look like high art. Thong Girl Volta from Outer Space was made on the 24th of August in 2014, and hopefully, after I've said it, it will vanish from your imagination. The more interesting conversation to have about Vanishings is a film that I think actually sets up a disaster, sets up another great movie to come, but also in the process sets up a disaster for its creator. F.W. Murnau is one of the great German expressionist silent filmmakers. And one of the reasons why you'll find out that sound came so slow to the movies was because it lost its international ability to travel. Once a film was no longer silent, title cards would no longer suffice to letting people know what was going on. The image was everything. Murnau was a master. He was a master visual storyteller. He was able to get performances out of actors that a lot of people weren't able to in the silent days. And with his designers, he was able to create horrific, nightmarish worlds. What he wasn't much of was an original storyteller. So in 1920, with Conrad Veidt, that Conrad Veidt, and Bela Lugosi, he made a film called The Head of Janus. And The Head of Janus is nothing more than a German version of Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But you see, there was no one there to sue. Robert Louis Stevenson was gone. And as far as he was concerned, he was in Germany, far away from the prying eyes of any potential, harassers, legal or otherwise. So he plowed ahead. 1920, he makes The Head of Janus. He gets away with it, and that probably is what convinced him he could get away with making Nosferatu in 1922. Nosferatu, which of course David Eggers has made a remarkable modern-day adaptation, very much in the spirit of Murnau's original film. But here's the problem. Anybody who's ever read Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, knows that with the exception of the name changes and the location changes, which don't look like much of a location change considering it's all in the 19th century and it all has that very gothic late 19th century feel, it's Dracula. It is blow by blow, point by point, storytelling rise and arc Dracula. And, Bram Stoker might have been alive, but his wife certainly was. And she took Mr. Murnau to court, and the court didn't take too long to say, you owe her a lot of money in the royalties from what you've already made and what you will continue to make in perpetuity. You can make a case that the head of Janus, which has vanished from the public imagination, unlike Nosferatu, is in fact the original sin that sets into motion the lawsuit that unravels Murnau over Nosferatu. And that's your strange day in science fiction here from Gage Illuminations. As asleep. After all, it's difficult to hear an idling freightliner over the sound of demon flutes at the center of creation. If whippoorwills begin circling your sleeper cab, discontinue use and avoid discussing family genealogy with strangers. Gage Illuminations reminds listeners that all its products advertised during this program are approved by absolutely known regulatory agency in this universe. As asleep. Available wherever good judgment is sold out. So we talk a lot about how to tell stories on Gage Illuminations and what kind of stories suggest what kind of storytelling technique. Now, I've told you that you can, fill somebody with dread. You can give them a jump scare. You can give them kind of a lingering sense of unease, or you can also create an overall sense of the paranoid. When it comes to vanishing stories, genuine vanishing stories, with very few exceptions, you're pretty much in the category of 3 and 4. You're looking at lingers. You want to create a lingering effect at the end of the first part of the story, the buttoning effect, the idea that when they disappear, it should leave the listener uneasy. But that plays in a lot of other things too. Resurrection Mary plays that through as well too. That lingering sense of sadness, that lingering sense of dread, the idea that rather than bring things to a thunderous close or kind of a startling close, you leave people kind of uneasy. What really builds that unease and what allows the linger to land even with more ferocity is a double ending, the vanishing and then the aftermath. Now, I began by talking about L8, the story of L8, about Cody and Adams, the two guys in the dirigible, the L8 dirigible who simply vanished. If you're going to tell that story, as Donald Sobel, author of Encyclopedia Brown, keeps the peace, saves the day, solves the case, as he does in 22 Strange But True Stories, you have to speculate, but you have to give people speculation. But the trick in the speculation and telling the story is don't let any of them be satisfactory, although you probably should land with one most likely. The most likely ones. But you've also got to play to your audience's, desires and wishes to some degree. I mean, like D.B. Cooper is one of the great disappearances of all time. That actually happened. The guy jumped out of an airplane. The guy was impeccably polite. The guy made off with hundreds of thousands of dollars. Boom, he's gone. Probably died. In all probability, he probably died. But a lot of people like to think that he's still out there wearing those mirrored sunglasses and, collecting interest while sitting on a beach. You want to kind of play to that. With the case of the L8, you have to kind of set it up nicely. The idea that the last thing they said was what? There is a suspicious oil slick down there. It's the last thing they said. So you can start playing with that. When they said suspicious oil slick, did they mean that they really thought it was an oil slick and thought it was suspiciously large with nothing else around it and that maybe it was a Japanese sub? Was it, in fact, the shape of something saying it's probably an oil slick, but it looks too big and maybe it's the shadow of a Japanese sub? Was it, in fact, something that was underneath the water that came up and went for them? That's ridiculous, though. I mean, that's completely speculative. I mean, it was the end of World War II, probably the Japanese, but how did both of them fall out? I mean, both of them fell out? The door was open. Were both of them standing by the door? Did they go there to get a better look? That doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't one stay on the controls while the other one took a look? Did one of them begin to fall and the other one reach and they both went out together? Is that what happened? There's no sign of an abandoning ship. I mean, we could talk about the Marie Celeste, too, about the ship that had 6 months of food and water and disappeared. and then ends up on a beach with those 6 months of food and water all still inside the boat and nobody in it, wondering why would they have gotten in a lifeboat? Why would they have been kidnapped? The cargo was still there. It's still intact. And on you go. Polly Melton is the one that comes most to mind. It's 1982. And this woman, Polly Melton, former teacher, has an older husband. He's 72. She's 58, right around there. And they live in one of those RVs, and they kind of do the whole, they're not travelers, they're not tankers. They're just people who kind of like you're enjoying, later life by going from national park to national park and all kinds of campgrounds. And Polly is there with two friends, and suddenly Polly takes off on a bit of a sprint walk, which is strange for her, but she seems to be smiling. She gets to the corner. She waves at her friends. She goes around the corner. When they come around, she's gone, and she's never seen again. And there's just enough stuff in regards to the geography of the situation and the emotional content of the situation to not give you a definitive answer, but to give you a whole bunch of directions in which you can go. Her husband, 72, was getting older rapidly. He was very sick. Remember, 72 and 82 is old. And she may have just not wanted to be his caretaker anymore. I mean, in fact, there is a road not too far from where that little trail was. You could walk straight to the interstate. Maybe somebody was waiting for her to take her away onto a new life. After all, there were supposed sightings of her years later on down the line. Or maybe somebody came out of those woods from the roadside and grabbed Polly and whisked her away and kidnapped her. Maybe a murderer. Maybe a disturbed person. All we know is that she turned a corner and was never seen again. That, by the way, is documentable. You can look that up. There still are no answers what happened there. Was it just simply a woman who'd had enough of the life that she'd been dealt and wanted to maybe start anew and start fresh? Or was it something more sinister? The only thing we know is that she was there, and less than a minute later, she was gone, never to be seen again. And we tell stories like that. By the way, I kind of blew that right there. What you would normally do is, she was gone and never to be seen again. We tell stories like that. You see, that's the other trick, too, when you're telling the story. You want to bring things to a pause and let the silence fill. Let the speculation begin. It's the greatest trick in the JFK assassination. You just start accumulating possibilities and angles and different approaches and different possibilities. And after a while, you're flooding the zone with so many theories and so many ideas that it almost seems despairing to try to figure it out. And you realize that vast forces are gathered against us, whether it's in Dealey Plaza or on a trail or in a field in Tennessee in front of somebody's wife, children, and his attorneys in broad daylight, reported by the Cincinnati Enquirer. David Lang. A sunny day when all was right in the world in America simply vanished, reminding us that even the best of situations can end in the blink of an eye. As Asleep is the official sleep aid of Gauge Illuminations. As Asleep is the official sleep aid of The Open Road. Long day behind the wheel? Can't sleep because the folks in the next truck insist on idling all night? Or is that neighbor running a reefer unit loud enough to wake the dead? As Asleep. Wake refreshed, or don't notice the difference. So, it's been exciting. WWOM, well, former broadcaster Remo Davis, his grandson, Leo Davis, good kid, dropped off a whole bunch of tapes. Kid's working on a documentary about the last year and a half or so of Davis's career before he disappeared from the face of the earth in 1973. And he brought over a stack of cassette tapes. And it was interesting, too, because I've been listening to them now, and we'll be playing the third one for you tonight. I'm about 6 or 7 in now, and I'm starting to notice a pattern. I've just started to notice it, so don't be surprised if you don't notice it in this particular episode. But for the first time, and this one is called The Hangman, for the first time, Remo begins to kind of articulate his worldview, as it were, some of the things that Remo believes. And so I want you to kind of pay attention to that beginning to get a real sense of what it is that kind of gets Remo going, what kind of gets his juices flowing, his mojo kind of happening. Give it a listen. This is Remo Davis, Pitch Black Vinyl. This is The Hangman.
A song about a disappearing girl, courtesy of a disappearing band. That was The Hangman, with 65's The Girl Who Faded Away. The haunting little B-side to their one and only hit, What a Girl Can't Do. Knocked the Beatles from number one. Remo Davis's Pitch Black Vinyl loves those deep cuts. We also love folks taking that shot at a real life, a specific happiness that lets them be who they want to be, and lets them be alone, lets them alone to do the thing I call the becoming. For all the downers of the decade, we can be thankful the becoming was part of what made the 60s the 60s. No, that's not it. The becoming wasn't just a happy accident of the 60s, part of the mosaic of the moment. It was the driving force, a possibility of a new way. Fortunate sons became lizard kings, middle-class housewives singing songs about wanting somebody to love, Boeing technical writers defying gravity's rainbow, little girl blues besting big brothers and their holding companies, Mr. Mojo rising. All about the becoming. Gotta keep on rising. But the becoming had its enemies. They zapped the Kong, they zapped the kids, and sapped the energy from the best of us by decade's end. But don't mourn for those who took their shot, burned bright, and left us too soon. Sitting on the dock of the bay, that wonderful world a long time coming, and dudes of the dune gone before their tide came in? Gone. Yes. Forgotten? No. Let us instead mourn those denied the shot of becoming by folks like the man upstairs. And that returns us to those hangmen we just played. By the time they got their shot, they didn't exist anymore. This takes us back to the beginning of 65. Despite having a little something going on, Tom Guernsey's Washington, D.C. garage rock group, the Reekers, drifts apart as members leave for college, including lead singer Joe Triplett. So guitarist and songwriter Guernsey forms a new combo with the remaining bandmates, calls him the Hangman. But Monument Records has the masters of What a Girl Can't Do and the song we just played, The Girl Who Faded Away. Problem is, those are Reekers songs, and the Reekers don't exist anymore. So Monument releases him under the Hangman, giving the Hangman full credit for a hit they didn't record. But that, listeners, isn't the other side of the album. The flip side of our story begins 5 years later at the National Highway Equipment, Communications and Driver Environment Expansion at the Potomac Ordnance and Observation Hall in D.C., where your old pal Remo had a chance run-in with none other than singer, songwriter, now record producer Tom Guernsey. And I asked him if he had any regrets that he couldn't keep those Reekers together. He stared at me a moment, sized me up, and makes a decision to tell me something he'd never told anyone else. And in the shadows of a 1970 parking garage, Tom tells me the Reekers' breakup was the luckiest thing ever happened to him. The Reekers are still kicking it. Tom notices a woman on the edge of the crowd. A different wavelength, a vision, black hair, pearly skin, the reddest lips, and every night singing along with What a Girl Can't Do. And every night a little closer to the stage, Sight of her gets so intoxicating, Tom can barely focus on the chords. And then comes the night she's waiting in the wings. Her name's Lily, wants to grab a drink, and over a sea breeze, Tom spills his guts about the music, the moment, and the myth-making. Said she just got back from Scotland and was headed to Venice Beach next, but postponed her trip when she heard the Reekers. Tells him the Reekers have got it. Everything but the name. But if the night works, she's got a name for him. Tom thought he had her in the palm of his hand, until Lily asked, "What's next?" Tom blows it. Tells her the Reekers were breaking up at summer's end. Joe triplets leaving for college. And Lily looks away. Bad for me. Good for you. Wait, what does she mean? And she tells him to get them another sea breeze and she'll explain. But when he comes back, she's gone, leaving only a pack of matches with the words, "The Hangman," written inside. And a week later, Tom pens The Girl Who Disappeared. And after a month, the Reekers break up. Tom forms the Hangman with the remaining members. Monument Record releases the Reekers recordings of What a Girl Can't Do and The Girl Who Faded Away under the Hangman name. The Hangman got the credit, got the hit, but he didn't get much else. Tom does see Lily again. She begins showing up at Hangman's split bills. Tom spots her immediately. But by the third time, he sees she's not watching him. Lily's there for the other half of the evening. Wally and the Vales, fronted by Wally Vale. A real talent. Wally's going to be the next big thing. But he found Lily instead. And after one show, they leave together. Tom decides to follow. Away from the crowds, away from the music, into an alley. He watches Lily pull the kid in close. Drive into him, really feeling like a creep. Tom goes to turn away, but then he notices a silhouette, opposite side of the alley. Now Tom can't leave. Is it a mugger? What if it's perverted shit? Some weird boyfriend shit? Are they in danger? Is Wally in danger? Wally's knees had buckled. Wally and Lily weren't kissing. She was pulling, wrenching something from the kid. It was a hollowing. And when it was done, Lily twirled towards the shadow, giggling into the darkness. Remo, we played with Wally and the Vales the next night. Whatever Wally had, Remo, whatever Wally Vale had was gone. His mojo was gone. Remo, Tom tells me, God help me, all I could think was, it could have been me. The Hangmen had a hit. They had the Reekers songs, and even records they didn't make. But they weren't becoming anything. They were the remains. And remains are what Lily left of Wally Vale. And now, listeners, you've heard the other side of the album. Speaking of the Remains, here's another band who disappeared before their time, The Remains, with Diddy What Diddy. I'm Remo Davis, and this is Pitch Black Vinyl.
Gauge Illuminations is proudly brought to you by Neuropep. Did you miss that exit? Don't worry, there's always another route with Neuropep. Neuropep is not intended to prevent encounters with elder things, shoggoths, impossible geology, biker clubs that apparently have been riding since the Permian era. Look, side effects do include improved route planning, healthier respect for maps, and refusing to investigate strange tracks in fresh snow. Stay alert, guys. Take Neuropep. I have been so looking forward to this particular Is It a Road Movie segment. Oh man. Okay, so I started the show off by telling you that this is my bag. Vanishings, David Lang and Onward, all the stuff that's wrapped around it, that's my jam. Told you when I was reading that Donald Sobel book, Strange But True, told you that this is the stuff that actually makes me go to bed and puts a little bit of the hair from the back of my neck stand up, that I actually start thinking about people disappearing, just gone. What the hell happened? I don't mean like the way Resurrection Mary does. I'm talking about when everything seems normal and right in the world. Everything is perfect. The world is a great place. Gallatin, Tennessee, wherever the hell you are, nice day vacationing. Man, when things just go suddenly sideways in the blink of an eye, woo! That's my jam. So what movie do you think I would choose to talk about that than the greatest escape act disappearance ending of all time? I'm talking about Richard Sarafian's 1970, Vanishing Point. The Vanishing Point. Oh, let's talk about this. And let's talk about it through the filter of what it takes to have a great road movie. Okay, first of all, is the majority of the movie spent on the road? You bet your ass it is. I mean, from the moment that film begins, he's bringing in one job and signing up for another. This dude, this crazy dude, Kowalski, and I'm not talking about the date-raping, wife-abusing monster Stanley Kowalski. I'm talking about a real American hero here, paid by Barry Newman. Kowalski is the real deal. There are people who are overrated, and there are great Americans, and Kowalski is a great American. He's a Medal of Honor award. He is a former race car driver, and he's a former police officer who was thrown off the force because he stopped his boss from raping women. The guy is a pure, straight-up hero. He's also disillusioned and broken. And so the entire movie is spent on the road because it is laid out. We're going to go from Denver with contraband. We're going to go to San Francisco, and we're going to get there 2 days early. That's how we're going to do it. We're going to make this happen. Number two, is the road a character? You bet your ass. It's a mean one, too. It's not a character. It is a Japanese monster is what it is. It's a giant, sprawling beast. It is arid landscapes. It is dust bowls. It is literally having to kind of thunder through graveyards and car graveyards and all kinds of treacherous turns. There's a moment when he is actually going toe-to-toe with a Jaguar that they set up a bridge that is so thin, that you don't know how he's going to get through it. And throughout the whole thing, Kowalski's character shines. There isn't an accident he causes. There isn't a moment of chaos in his wake that he doesn't check to make sure the people left behind are actually okay. That road is a beast. It's a sumbitch, as Jackie Gleason would say in Smokey and the Bandit. It is a monster. Number three. That Dodge, that magnificent Dodge that he drives, that white Dodge, is a beautiful car. It is a roaring car with a gigantic engine that can power and thunder him in every direction he wants to go, but it's also a gas guzzler. It's also a gas guzzler that handles wide. The character of that car, that Dodge, is so superb that it becomes a collaborator. It's almost like a buddy movie with the car as his buddy. It's perfect. Is there a map laid out? Well, we got the basic, right? We know we're going from one point to another. We're going from Denver to San Francisco, right? Is there a map laid out? Man, it's a triple map. We get a map in the beginning of what the route has to be. Then we get these, I don't want to call them chippies. How will we call it? They're state troopers. They're female state troopers who all kind of sit there putting up these charts about where he is and where he's going next and where the next roadblock should be. But even better than that, Cleavon Little plays a DJ. He plays this DJ who actually narrates the whole thing for us. It's got its own Greek chorus. The film literally narrates the route while showing you the route, while giving you the map. It's got a map, and it's laid out perfectly. And then finally, is Kowalski transformed? He goes from a cynical, broken, heartbroken in many ways man, until finally being able, through transformative actions, achieve real transformation. Whether it's violent or redemptive is up for you to see. This is important, by the way. Without the scene, it's debatable whether it's a road movie. But if you're going to watch it, make sure you watch the version with the great actress Charlotte Rampling. She's terrific in it, but in the American version, original one, she's not in it. That scene is transformative because of what happens to Kowalski in that scene and what is articulated by that hitchhiker that he encounters on the road before the final moment of The Vanishing Point. Is The Vanishing Point a road movie? You bet your ass it is. You know what the chrome rubber duck is going to say, and you know what I'm going to say. If you haven't seen The Vanishing Point, you need to check it out. By the way, despite early reactions to it, it did pretty damn good. It was always on a double feature with The French Connection. Not a road movie, by the way, just a chase movie. Vanishing Point is a great road movie and a great chase movie. If you haven't seen it, you're missing something. As Asleep is the official sleep aid of Gauge Illuminations. As Asleep is the official sleep aid of The Open Road. Long day behind the wheel? Can't sleep because the folks in the next truck insist on idling all night? Or is that neighbor running a reefer unit loud enough to wake the dead? As Asleep. Wake refreshed, or don't notice the difference. We began the show with a documented fact. The Cincinnati Enquirer, of all newspapers. 1892, Cincinnati Enquirer prints a story about a man named David Lang over in Gallatin, Tennessee. Just outside of Gallatin, Tennessee. Lovely place. Great place these days. Got a great downtown area. Really charming place. The kind of place you go when you want to escape the hustle, bustle, and the hectic nature that is Nashville these days. It's just far enough away where Nashville won't quite get there in the next couple of decades, so it's still a nice place to visit. It was a nice place back then. Families, farms, lots of good stuff. And as the story goes in the Cincinnati Enquirer that we began with, as I told you, David Lang, successful, prosperous farmer, married, 2 beautiful children, so well off that he actually had attorneys and bookkeepers. His bookkeeper and his attorney came by and they visited him and squared away the books, made the miracle happen. They're riding off, bookkeeper, lawyer, riding off on a horse. Wife, children on the front porch. David Gallatin, everything is right in the world, walking across his own farm field. Walking across that farm field, nothing wrong in his world, and then in a blink of an eye, he's gone. He didn't fall in a hole. He didn't trip and roll down a hill. Wasn't struck by lightning. He vanished. Well-documented fact in the Cincinnati Enquirer. There it is. His wife saw it happen, horrified. His children didn't know what they saw. They just saw Dad gone. And the attorney and the bookkeeper in that carriage, I think they were father and son, if I remember the story correctly, they didn't understand. And everybody thought that everybody else would be like, oh, no, David fell. Oh, no, David just took a turn. Oh, every single person, all 5 of them said that's what they saw. And it made its way to the Cincinnati Enquirer. And it became a very big story, so much so that Ambrose Bierce, yes, that Ambrose Bierce, actually began this whole adventure quoting Ambrose Bierce, talking about his Devil's Dictionary, worked for the San Francisco Chronicle, worked for the Hearst papers. He was so kind of fascinated by the story that he actually went out there to kind of do research on it. Maybe make a piece of fiction, explore what happens afterwards, explore what happened to David Lang, those fateful days in the 1890s. Except when Bierce goes out there, what he discovers is that it never happened at all. Joe Mulhattan is the name you should keep in mind. Was a salesman, traveling salesman who made his way across the country. 1890, he makes his way to Gallatin, Tennessee, and Joe loved his wife dearly, but he also was a prankster and loved to play tricks on her. And one of the things he would do is when he would go to a boring town, he'd get in the hotel room or the boarding house, and he would write his wife letters from the road, because he'd be on the road for a long time, so she would get a series of letters. And according to the wife and according to Joe, he would write her these letters, and you wouldn't know if these wild, tall tales he was telling, his own version of urban legends, was in fact true until the end of the letter. He would give her some sort of clue or some sort of wink or some sort of way of letting her know this in fact happened or didn't. On that particular day in boring Gallatin, Tennessee, where nothing ever happens, he, out of the thin air, made David Lang appear in order to make him disappear. There was no David Lang. There was no farm. There was no child. There was no wife. There were no lawyers. There were no bookkeepers. There was no disappearance. Well, he was made to appear in a letter and then made to disappear in a letter, and his wife was so kind of taken by the story and obviously didn't get the clue inside of it that said it wasn't real. She took it down to the Cincinnati Enquirer. And they picked up the story and ran with it. And suddenly, an urban legend, a little game between husband and wife to make the time pass, to make the hard life on the road away from the people you love a little more fun. Look forward to all those letters coming. Actually makes its way not into the public imagination as an urban legend, but as certifiable fact. Bierce was a bit better of a reporter than the people who worked for the Chronicle. They never even went out there to kind of research the story. If you guys think for a minute that this terrible trend you've heard about where people write press releases and then people just reprint them in the newspaper is like this new thing, that there was once this glorious age of journalistic standards, there was. It was called the 50s, and then it came to an end towards the late 60s and mid-70s. There was like maybe a 25, 15-year period where newspapers and the news and the media didn't behave either lazily, irresponsibly, or with kind of a reckless sort of joyful, willful, sort of nonsensical, if it reads, it bleeds, there it is. They did it. They printed it. They didn't research it. Bierce did. He went out there, and he was so kind of taken with what had happened that he wrote a story called The Difficulties in Crossing a Field, about a man who walks across a field and simply disappears into thin air. I find that really interesting, too, because now we get to some really weird stuff. Because do you know how Ambrose Bierce died? You don't. No one does. Because in the midst of the Mexican Revolution, Bierce crossed the border to go cover the war and ride with Pancho Villa, and he walked into Mexico, and he never came back. So maybe Bierce was actually headed out there to kind of do a little deep diving on how he might want to exit the earth. And instead of writing a fictional story of a story that actually didn't happen, he was writing a fictional story for what he actually planned to happen. Disappearances are a weird bird in regards to urban legends. As I've told you guys earlier, they're the oddest of the bunch, because usually when we tell an urban legend or a ghost story or a spook story, we tell them in abandoned lots. We tell them in train depots that haven't been running forever. We tell them on the lonely side of the road. We tell them in haunted houses. We tell them under cursed bridges. But vanishings leave us more puzzled than anything else, because the world is fine, and it's going swell, and it's a sunny day. Our kids are there, and our wife is there, and our friends are there, and everybody that loves us is there, and we don't have a problem in the world, and we walk around a corner, and no one ever sees us again. And there's no answer. And there's no reason. And when there's no body, there's no closure. So, in the case of a vanishing, there's no jolt, there's no dread, there's no paranoia. You can add those things onto the story. But what we're talking about here is a lingering sense of unease, that there are questions that will never be answered. And that's Gauge Illuminations. What do you say we kick it over to our man on the road and find out what's coming our way for next week?
As a paranormal investigating trucker, well, I've seen 50 versions, if not more, of our next subject. Yeah, we're going to be going to Boggy Creek, Polk, Arkansas. Small population, big fella walking among them. But I got to tell you, every single state's got a big fella out there, about 7 feet tall. 3 toes. Should be good at basketball, but, well, too much hair. Bigfoot is what we'll be talking about. The cryptid. Numero uno when it comes to urban legends as far as I'm concerned. Don't let me people that's hitchhiking stuff. Nonsense. I say it's Bigfoot. Jimmy Mack says it's hitchhikers, but I say it's Bigfoot. Big hearts, big feet, big gauge illuminations.